It's also important to note, for our HTTP requester endpoint as of 3.6, we can very easily add in URI parameters, query parameters, and headers. If we need to add data to the payload, in the case of posting or putting data out to the resource, we could set payloads, and we can even add attachments on inside of our flows. Let's dive right into another walkthrough, where we look at a couple different means of calling for specific destinations, through query parameters, through static values, eventually through a URI parameter as well. And we're going to get the opportunity to modify our HTTP request connector to use a URI parameter that's dynamic when all is said and done. Let's meet up inside a studio. Now what we want to be able to do is to make this endpoint dynamic, so it can request different airports such as SFO, LAX, CLE, without actually having to just call all of the airports at once. Now, before we change this, let's hop into a web browser and see what these calls would look like. Inside of Postman here, I'm going to call the same address as I did before, so I'd encourage you to call your Essentials United Flights resource. And instead of just calling flights, let's ask for SFO. So all flights from United going to San Francisco Airport. In this case, when hitting send, you should see that the data that comes back is limited to just those with the destination of SFO. We want our Mule application to do the exact same thing. So let's get started with this. Inside of Anypoint Studio, we want to change the behavior of this HTTP endpoint. So this requester connector endpoint now needs something different inside of its path. So what we can do here, very simply, is add in a destination URI parameter. So by adding in a URI parameter, but including curly braces around it, we're specifying that it's going to be dynamic. It's going to be a parameter, more or less. So I'll call this destination. Now, in bringing my configuration box a little bit higher so that you can see it, once I've put in destination with the curly braces, you're going to see that the parameters box in the bottom automatically recognizes that we want a URI parameter here, that the name of that URI parameter is going to be destination, and then also that we want some type of value there as well. In this case, let's make it static by typing in SFO. So far, so good. So what we'll go ahead and do here is we will click out into the canvas. Let's save up our project. Now, if your project is still running, you can go into console and make sure that it redeploys. If it's not, be sure to run the project once again so that your Mule is up and kicking. And now let's go back inside of our call in Postman or in a web browser. And let's do our simple request one more time of 8081/United. And in sending this request through again, now instead of getting from Mule all of the results back, we're actually passing this URI parameter in our HTTP requester and getting only SFO flights back from that call. All right, so let's make this be a little bit more dynamic, where we can essentially pass via a URI parameter what destination that we are looking for, or what code rather, and then be able to pass a particular airline code in and have our Mule application request that specific code. So what we'll go ahead and do here is we'll head back inside of Anypoint Studio. And inside of that HTTP requester, let's go ahead and make this a little bit more dynamic. So what we'll go ahead and do is, instead of just having the value SFO here, let's write an expression that utilizes a query parameter. So as a review from Mel, we can simply use our autocomplete by putting in hash. We're going to call the message context, put in a dot notation to ask for the inbound properties, put a dot in again from inbound properties to ask for the HTTP query parameters, and then we're going to request dot code to get the airline code from this particular request. Now with our code in, let's go ahead and save up the project one more time. Remember, you may want to click in the canvas and save just to make sure those changes are seen and applied. I'll go into my console and just verify that Mule recognizes the changes and the runtime has restarted, and then I'll flip back into Postman. Now back into Postman or a web browser, if that's what you're using to test, the criteria that I specified here should now be satisfied. So by typing in CLE in this case and hitting send, you can see that I'm able to get the data back for all United flights to CLE. If you change from CLE to something like LAX, same idea. and then try one more time with the airline or destination code PDF, and once again, you should get that flight as well. Looking good. Now, let's make a little bit of an assumption and make it more interesting here. Let's say that if this code is not introduced or it is left out, that we want to assume the requested destination is SFO in all cases. But also, if the code is specified, we don't want to request SFO flights because that would be quite useless. We want to make sure if somebody asks for PDF, they get that particular flight to PDF. So what we'll do here in kind of an update to our app is we'll go back to Anypoint Studio. And let's go ahead and introduce a variable in between our two HTTP endpoints. So inside of the search box, I'm going to type in variable. As you might recall from before, this variable is essentially a flow variable that will be persisted throughout the life of this flow and the message in this flow. Now what we're going to do in this variable, if we double click, is we're going to set a new variable. We're going to call the name of this variable destination, and we're going to write a somewhat more complex expression in how we're going to store this variable. So what we want to say here once again is if that query parameter was not included, let's go ahead and request flights to SFO. If that query parameter does exist though, let's respect the user's input and get those particular flights. Now, one easy way we can do this is with somewhat of an inline if statement here. So what we can go ahead and do is we'll add in double quotes to wrap the question that we're going to ask. Let's go ahead and call message dot, and then using autocomplete, we're going to ask for message.inboundProperties dot query params, and then after query params, we're going to ask for dot code. Now, with this expression in here, we want to see if this value is equal to empty. And as you might recall from earlier as well, empty is a great way to check to see if it's null, blank, just a space in a string, and so on. So this will be a very good check for us. Now, this being a ternary expression, what we're going to go ahead and do here is add in a question mark, and then we'll specify what should happen if it is true and what should happen if it's false. So if it's true, inside of single quotes, we're going to pass the string literal SFO. We'll put a colon in, and if it's false, we're going to put in a expression here. Essentially what we want to do if it's false is we want to respect the code. So to save us some time, let's go ahead and copy this expression, message.inboundproperties.http_queryparams.code, and let's paste it after the colon. So now as this expression's gotten a bit longer, if that query param code is empty, let's write SFO. And if it is not empty, let's write to this flow variable the value of code. Now, we also need to update our HTTP requester to respect this newly found flow variable. So by selecting our HTTP endpoint and going down to our parameters, let's replace this long value that we've got here with something much simpler. Recalling Mel, we have the ability to ask for flow vars. So by using our autocomplete feature here, I can look through and find flow vars. And again, one of the great things about the context assistance inside of Mule or Studio is when I click dot, I can see destination because I've introduced it in the variable up top. So I'll select destination, and now I'm asking for flowvars.destination. Let's go ahead and save up our project one more time. Inside of console, and again, you may want to just do a sanity check, click in the canvas and be sure to save. Inside of console, if we look closely, hopefully our Mule runtime has seen the changes we've made in Anypoint Studio, redeployed. Let's go back to our web browser for a moment here, and let's test this out. So in short, this request should produce the same as before. LAX should give me all flights to LAX, and that looks good. Now, the key difference here is, in the absence of the code query parameter, we should only get flights to SFO. Let's test this out now. So I'll hit send, check out our JSON. Looks like we got 3 flights back going to SFO, SFO, and SFO. So now we've introduced a little bit of a more complex expression to give our Mule app some more advanced behavior.